Sinisterism is about finding the primal aspects of the left-hand path, primal in history, primal in the psyche, thus obtaining truth. Thomas LeRoy.
Greetings, my friends, and welcome back to your dose of sinister heathenry. But for those new to the channel, I'm Thomas LeRoy, founder of the International Left-Hand Path organization, the Sect of the Horn God. The sect is an educational foundation created to not only make those with the black flame aware of its glow, but to also restore the shadow aspects to the ancient gods by going deep into the past, not only historically, but also psychologically. For the primordial depths of the psyche are limitless. So, if this sounds interesting, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And if you want to learn more, join the organization, the Sect of the Horn God, at the link down below. Thank you. This video, in many respects, is a companion or part 2 of my last video entitled The Savage State of Nature, wherein I presented that modern civilization is unnatural. Hence, the Western world is not progressing, but in truth, regressing. Don't get me wrong, I'm not advocating that everything was wonderful in the world of the primordial. I do like the fact that in the modern world we have antibiotics, microwave ovens, and indoor plumbing. What I'm saying is that we've drifted away from a more naturalistic state of existence, from the primordial wisdom, if you will, and that deeper connection with the collective unconscious, and toward a plastic manifestation of what it is to be human. It's obvious. But this regression is something greater than just mass nihilism, economic collapse, pandemics, or war. You know the shit we see in the news every day. Those are only the symptoms of the disease. I speak of the greater sociological manifestation, that which is leading to the degradation of the human spirit. Spiritual de-evolution, if you will. This idea is sometimes referred to as traditionalism. Now, traditionalists get a bad rap, often being labeled fascists. The truth is, they see fascism as simply being another byproduct of modernity, not unlike the other isms such as socialism and communism. This is because all three reduce the populace down to its lowest common denominator. Thus, fascism doesn't fit within the traditionalist hierarchical worldview, which is based on traditions going back into ancient history. So when I use the word traditionalist, I'm not talking about traditional like in Americans who like baseball, hot dogs, and apple pie. Instead, this kind of traditionalism is used to denote those cultures that are still guided, informed by the attraction into the principles of the domain of the spirit, or the deeper reaches of the psyche. And the writers, thinkers, and philosophers who call themselves traditionalists accept the premise of the Perennial Philosophy. And what is that, you may ask? Well, it's a form of spiritual pluralism that views religious traditions as sharing a metaphysical truth. Also referred to as the Sophia Perennis, it's commonly understood as reflecting a truth that has no beginning and which remains the same in all expressions of wisdom. Basically, what I'm getting at here is, even though, let's say, Christianity and Hinduism appear to have nothing in common, they both point to the same thing. That is, they are directed at some sort of union with a Godhead or God or the source. And to understand the Western world's gradual separation of mind and spirit over the ages, we need to first understand the importance to the traditionalists of the ancient cyclical interpretation of time. In Hindu cosmology, there are yugas, or the ages of humankind, a cyclical way of assessing the spiritual condition of humanity. It is believed that spiritually, civilization devolves through the yugas as people drift further and further away from the source or the divine. First, there was the Golden Age, then the Silver, then the Bronze, and finally the Age of Iron, called the Kali Yuga. And the Kali Yuga is where we find ourselves right now, at the end of the cycle of the 4 yugas. In Hindu belief, the Kali Yuga leads to the destruction of the world, which will then give birth to a new cycle of 4 yugas. It is said that the Kali Yuga began with the death of Lord Krishna, estimated as having occurred roughly 3000 BCE. More on that later. The Kali Yuga is filled with destruction, war, and conflict. As with the end of the world prediction, pundits have attempted to calculate the end date of the Kali Yuga. But when that does take place, some Hindus believe that Shiva will come to punish and cleanse the world, which has sunk to the point of being incapable of enlightenment, thus resulting in the transformation of the universe with the start of a new cycle of yugas. And that new cycle begins soon, for some believe we are near the end of the Kali Yuga. Even though the concept of perennialism has been around for many, many years, the man who refined this school of thought was Rene Ganan. Ganan was a French metaphysician, writer, and editor who, during his youth, was attracted to various occultic circles, joining several of these orders and eventually being initiated into Islamic esotericism at the age of 24. Making the judgment that tradition was lost in the West, Ganan relocated to Cairo, living a fruitful intellectual life, writing several books, articles, and reviews. His writings include 29 books, 500 articles, and reviews ranging from the domains of religion, metaphysics, the traditional sciences, the sacred arts, symbolism, occultism, esotericism, and of course, criticism of the modern world. His discussions of Eastern doctrines were based upon the purely metaphysical aspects of their teachings, especially Islam, Hinduism, and Taoism. His works were marked by an emphasis on tradition while trying to sweep away modern thoughts such as rationalism, atheism, and existentialism. To bring about what he saw as the truth of tradition, Ganan believed he had to exorcise those conceptual artifices that had possessed the minds of Western scholars, preventing them from understanding the perennial truths of tradition. And he saw individualism as detrimental to the spiritual advancement of humankind. As you can probably surmise, Ganan was not on the left-hand path. In his eyes, the ultimate spiritual goal was to be one with the Godhead. If the source is the manifestation of truth, then it's universal. Thus, the individual can hold no claim on it. In a sense, the idea is, if you're truly aware, you become immersed one with the all. There is no separation. Now, even though Ganan is very important when it comes to traditionalism, I don't know if I fully accept all of his assumptions, but when it comes to modernity, there we share a kinship. Now, if I'm going to do a video on traditionalism, how could I not bring up Julius Evola? You may not have been familiar with Rene Ganan, but you know who Evola is, don't you? But for those of you who aren't familiar with him, Julius Evola was a cultural, religious, philosophical, esoteric, and political writer, along with being the ultimate traditionalist who called for a primordial rebirth, whose revolt against the modern world aimed to restore a primeval hierarchy. A man who believed in the Nietzschean idea that one should have self-mastery before attempting any mastery of the world, who espoused the higher order of being against the lower order of becoming, who also established the doctrine of magical idealism. And Evola declared that to battle against the modern world, the differentiated individuals of the left-hand path should utilize dark, violent sexual powers. Born in Rome to a Sicilian aristocratic family, he suffered an existential crisis after returning from service in World War I, which nearly resulted in suicide. Reading Buddhist passages and experimenting with ether brought him out of his psychological funk, which transformed him completely. He experienced his self, with a capital S, as being identical with the highest spiritual power in the universe. Seeing art as flowing from a higher consciousness, he tried his hand at Dadaism, Evola being considered the main Italian representative of that art form. In 1922, he abandoned his artistic pursuits and instead dedicated himself to the construction of his own philosophical system, which he called magical idealism. In time, he formulated the notion of an absolute self related to the idea of the Hindu Atman. He postulated the absolute self as being free from all spiritual or material confines, wherein freedom, power, and realization form a unity. Although his ideas were based in Western philosophical traditions, he became interested in Tantraism, drawn by its practical emphasis and promise of direct transcendental experiences. And through the writings of Rene Ganan, Evola got his first exposure to the idea that all fundamental religions and cultures arise from a single transcendent origin. From 1927 to 1929, he led the magical initiatory group of whose goal was complete human self-transformation and integration into the transcendental by way of an experimental path. And after the group disbanded, Evola formed a political and literary journal. In the 1930s, he busied himself with the study of alchemy while also writing a critical analysis of the then prevailing esoteric groups. His underlying traditional philosophy did not see cultural development as advancement, but rather as decay, a view that reflected the aforementioned Kali Yuga. During this time, Evola also traveled throughout Europe to meet with representatives of political views that corresponded to his anti-liberal and anti-democratic ideas. He also had an interest in the ancient religion at the foundation of the Roman Empire, which he hoped to see reestablished. Before and during World War II, Evola focused on Buddhism, which he described as a path to spiritual freedom. But he rejected the widespread teaching of modern Buddhism with its notions of universal peace, love, and compassion. He believed one should gain clear initiatory knowledge through asceticism and exercise, pointing out that the historical Buddha was himself a member of the warrior caste. Now we'll get into let's say, the sketchy aspects of Evola's life. Although he was never a party member, Evola's involvement with both fascism and National Socialism has contributed to his, let's say, controversial reputation. Initially, Evola hoped Italian fascism, that's the real fascism, would lead Italy back to pre-Christian Roman paganism, but he quickly realized it was just another symptom of modernity. Thus, he was drawn to German National Socialism, and particularly the SS. He considered the SS a fighting spiritual order, at least in the beginning, but in 1938, they denounced him. This was because he was in opposition to the biologic racism of Hitler's Germany. He warned that the biological theories of race were not aristocratic enough and did not grasp true racial nobility. For example, he would have greater appreciation for a samurai than he would for, let's say, a hillbilly racist, even though he and the hillbilly were both white. Get what I'm saying? He believed that just because you're a certain color or race doesn't automatically make you noble. This is because he accepted what's called the aristocracy of the soul. So the truth is, his views on the topic of race were more complex than one might think. Another example would be his take on the Jews. Even though he was known for being anti-Semitic, he highly valued Orthodox and Kabbalistic Judaism. Now, getting back to his life, Evola suffered a spinal injury in a bomb attack in 1945 and was confined to a wheelchair for the rest of his life. After the war, he continued his studies of Eastern philosophy, Zen Buddhism in particular, and came to a firm spiritual political position far above daily politics. He continued to write for the rest of his life and died in 1974. Now, like Julius Evola, I too believe in the nobility of the soul, that some people have an exalted aspect to their being. Evola may have been a bit more selective, let's say, but for me, this nobility of the soul goes for all kinds of people, no matter their income, their social status, the color of their skin, or the location of their birth. You know it when you meet them, that person with that innate nobility that transcends all social barriers. Besides, I despise collectivism, and racism is collectivism at its crudest. It's too simplistic. Besides, you deprive yourself of connecting with some outstanding human beings, and there aren't too many outstanding human beings in the world. Now, when it comes to the Kali Yuga, I agree with both Evola and Ganan. We are not progressing, but regressing, and it just gets worse with every attempt made to better the world. Thus, you can say I have some traditionalist values, but my philosophy of sinister primordialism doesn't exactly adhere to the universal metaphysics of perennialism. I don't see divinity as coming down from on high, but instead up from below, a primordial wisdom based deep within the subconscious, carved within our very DNA. It is the primordial wisdom called the eternal natural law. There is, in ancient traditions, what could be called the eternal natural law, or the eternal way, a philosophy that is believed by some to have been spread across the Eurasian landmass some 5,000 to 6,000 years ago by the priestly caste of the Proto-Indo-Europeans. Now, I didn't originate this hypothesis by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm one of the few who uses the term eternal natural law when referring to this idea. It is in some ways synonymous with the Sophia Perennis, but it's more grounded, more materialistic, and less metaphysical, which would upset the perennial purists. And this idea of a common origin of myths appears to hold some validity when we recognize the very real similarities in the gods, folk tales, and traditions from India to Ireland. But while doing research for this video, the unexpected happened. I discovered a correlation between the beginning of the Kali Yuga and the sudden migration of the Proto-Indo-Europeans. First, though, we'll paint a picture of who these people were. They who originated on the Eurasian steppe north of the Black Sea and who domesticated the horse and invented the chariot. There were different groups within the greater Proto-Indo-European cultures, but the one we'll focus on here is the Yamnaya. A fierce, warlike people, the Yamnaya swept into Europe on horseback about 5,000 years ago, leaving a lasting impact on the genomes of the Europeans to this day. Thus, within just a few hundred years, the Yamnaya contributed to at least half of the Central European genetic ancestry. Besides interbreeding with the locals, the Yamnaya brought with them metallurgy, animal herding skills, and that ancestral tongue from which all of today's 400 Indo-European languages spring. But force may not be the only explanation for the spreading of their genes. There's a theory that the indigenous European women could have been attracted to the Yamnaya men with their tall stature, confidence, and new technologies such as wagons and bronze axes. This was a hierarchical culture and extremely patriarchal, organized around bounds of male kinship. They had leaders and followers, people who ruled and people who obeyed, and there are indications that they were not only divided by status but by wealth as well. This hierarchical culture, which the Indian caste system has roots in, corresponds with the traditionalist hierarchy espoused by people like Evola. Thus, Yamnaya culture could be at the foundation of traditionalist philosophy. But the most efficient way of spreading a culture is not through conquest, but through religious or spiritual means. Thus, we come to my hypothesis. The Kali Yuga began with the death of Krishna roughly 3000 BCE or 5,000 years ago. This falls in line with the beginnings of the migration of the Yamnaya out of their region on the steppe, which could have been, as some believe, due to climate change. But herein lies the question. Did departing from their homeland, that place of origin, that source of that harsh, barbaric culture, leave an imprint on the psyche of the Yamnaya? For millennia, they had form and structure in a specific location, their traditional homeland, the place that housed the bones of their ancestors. Think about it. The violent hierarchical system at the heart of the Yamnaya culture may be the condensed pure essence of traditionalist philosophy, and that purity was watered down with the migrational expansion, thus bringing about the final cycle of iron, the Kali Yuga. We all have genetic memory embedded in our very genes, so the possibility, the essence of the dispersal of the Yamnaya and their primordial traditionalist philosophy became locked away in the collective memories of our shared DNA, which includes not only memories of those severe traditionalist values, but also the spiritual ones as well. And here in modernity, when those genetic memories arise and that spiritual philosophy, that primordial wisdom is revealed to us, it's not on an intellectual level, but someplace that feels more transcendent, otherworldly and miraculous. In conclusion, it's too late to reverse the Kali Yuga. Aldous Huxley, who authored the book The Perennial Philosophy, also wrote Brave New World, which paints an accurate picture of where we are in this age of what Nietzsche called the last man, he who loves his servitude and his meaningless petty comforts, while his malformed homunculi offspring hunches over its phone, waiting for that next endorphin rush like a vulture over a carcass. It's too late. But, as Julius Evola said, all we can do in the Kali Yuga is ride the tiger. Until next time.